So thank you guys for coming tonight. I just wanted to let you know about the rest of the year events. So we have one October 28th, our Halloween series with Alan Nichtowski from Funware. He's the CEO of Funware. And then we sort of have a joint December, November startup grind going on because of the holidays and things like that. We usually have them the last Monday of the month, and that is actually the week of Thanksgiving. So, and I think the last Monday of December is right around Christmas. So just skipped all of that. We're doing a December 2nd event with Robin Thurston, who is the CEO of Map My Fitness. So, yes.
I don't really know this, but the Monday email that goes out, this event is showing up as today in Ontario. I don't know if you saw that. So
I did. Yeah, I'll have to get that fixed. It was supposed to be the 30th, and then I had to move it for. I hope they don't. I haven't sold any tickets for the 30th event, so that hopefully not. They'll be unfortunately disappointed, but thank you. I'll go and make sure. I suspect that there is some artifact somewhere in the system. I just have to clean up. So, welcome. I want to introduce my guest today. This is Erine Gray. He's the CEO of Aunt Bertha. I'm really excited to have him here because this is the first startup that we've had that focuses on social good, providing a service that helps people we've had a lot of very interesting and great startups, but this is a space that is particularly near and dear to my heart. And Aunt Bertha, he'll probably explain it much better than I do, but in a nutshell, helps people find the services that are available to them in their area when they need it. And it's one of the things that if you're somebody who is trying to help, you work for a charity organization or an aid organization, you're trying to help people get connected with resources, it can be very cumbersome, and his product makes it a lot easier for people to find us. He comes from a background of consulting. He has a degree from LBJ, and without further ado, please.
Thank you.
So we're going to go way back.
Uh-oh.
Where did you grow up? I know it's not here.
So I'm from a small town in New York, a little town called Olean, which is about a 6-hour drive directly west of New York City on what used to be old Highway 17. It was funny, I had my 20-year reunion in June, and the population has shrunk by 50% in the last 20 years. So it's about an hour south of Buffalo, right near the Pennsylvania border. So you can essentially throw a rock and you'll be in a different state. So I'm from Western New York, and then
How did you get to Indiana University?
to IU, yeah. So I was not. I was really excited to get out of my hometown, which explains the halving of the population. I was good at math. I always thought I wanted to be an engineer, and I applied to Carnegie Mellon and Purdue and University of Michigan. The only reason why I applied to the University of Michigan was because I was a fan of college basketball, and that was the era of the Fab Five. Well, they probably saw through that in my application, and I didn't get in. I didn't get into Carnegie Mellon. I got into Purdue, so I went to Purdue to study computer science. And then it became very apparent, primarily because of my .6 GPA one semester might have had something to do with the fact that I failed out. So I basically didn't tell anybody and delivered pizza for a semester, and then got back in and decided to take one computer science course, and thinking that I could just show up to that course, and I proceeded to fail that. So I failed out of college twice, and then basically did some traveling, and I had a little bit of money for my summer job, and traveled around the country through staying at hostels and getting various Amtrak passes, and did a lot of sort of growing up. And when all of your friends are having fun at college and you're delivering pizza, I worked on a UPS truck one semester or one holiday season. And yeah, when your friends, this is before Facebook, but you still found out that your friends are having a lot more fun than you were. And then I realized, okay, I think I need to get things together. And so I applied and got back into Indiana University at Indianapolis. It's called IUPUI. And finally was grown up enough to where I did well in school, and transferred to IU and got a degree in economics. which led to I actually worked as a programmer it was great because I was no longer in the pizza business after that. So I got a job as a programmer in the Kelley School of Business at Indiana University. And in fact, I developed the bidding algorithm that the business school used to get interviews with all of the big companies that would come. So I wrote that piece of software. And as tempting as it was, I did not game it so that I can get the good interviews. Although I did have coworkers that asked what the rules were. I would answer the question, but I would not give them extra bids. So that was my first real big software project. So because I had, I understood software. It was a Cold Fusion. Anybody ever code in Cold Fusion or remember? Of course, Stanley. We went to school together and started the same job. Because of that, I really understood it, and it was during the dot-com boom, sort of towards the end of it, and then so we got a great job offer for a company that Adele did a lot of business with called Lante, and then that's what brought me to Texas.
Excellent. So when you were growing up in Western New York, did you think, I'm going to grow up and be a computer programmer and start my own company?
No. I mean, I never really had a desire to be an entrepreneur. I mean, I did entrepreneurial things. I haven't shared this too publicly that often, but
excellent.
When I was
an exclusive,
like 10 or 11, I want to say, it was back when, I don't know if anybody remembers, but back when basketball cards were just starting to become valuable. So basketball and football cards were starting to become valuable. I don't remember exactly what year it was, 86 maybe. And all of my friends, baseball cards were always valuable. So there was a market. So you would go to the pawn shop and you could sell your baseball cards. There were card shops. But my friends did not know that basketball and football cards were valuable. So I would go to their house and I would have money from my paper out, and I would have money to buy their excess basketball football cards, and I started making a killing off of that. Well, at that time, $40 is a killing.
It's all relative.
And my dad, I remember one time he asked me, and he said, "Where are you getting all this money?" And I said, and then like he didn't let me finish, and I kind of thought I was busted. He goes, "Are you gambling?" And I said, "Yes, I'm playing poker." You got to quit doing that, because I knew if I told him that, what I did, because I was buying these football and basketball cards, and then I would then take them and sell them to the card shops, and just kept making money off of that. So my dad thought I had a gambling habit at the age of 11 or whatever. So that was my most entrepreneurial thing. And then in college, I had a job where I sold books door to door. It was an educational program. I did that for 5 summers, and really enjoyed it. That's where I started to fall in love with Texas. And the only reason why I went into computer science in the first place was it was back when you look at what are the most marketable degrees in which you get a job where you don't have to worry about paying bills. We were a sort of lower middle class family, and I just didn't want to worry about paying bills. So I didn't really have a love for computer science. I was interested in politics and public policy, so when I actually started studying economics, I did a lot better. Computer science is really, really hard, and so I did enough to learn how to be a programmer, and then got my first job as a programmer.
It is a good thing to have to fall back on.
Yeah, and especially, we'll get to that later, but yeah.
So what did you study at LBJ, other than public affairs, but what in particular was your interest in?
Sort of leading up to the LBJ experience, it was at my job with Lante. I was staffed in New York City on September 11th, so I actually flew into New York City on September 11th at 1 in the morning and stayed at the Roosevelt Hotel there. And I was actually there because of a project with an insurance company that the company was doing business for one of their subsidiaries, and we had an office on Fifth Avenue. So when I was leaving the hotel and walking this Fifth Avenue, I saw the North Tower fall, and that was enough of an experience where you're thinking, okay, what do I want to do? And I was actually laid off a couple months after that. Later brought back as a contractor. And I did a lot of journaling at that point, so I just knew that, I just felt like the particular project I was on was a Java project where we were just automating the renewals of insurance policies. And it was the worst, most boring project you could possibly.
Soul-sucking?
It was horrible. And not because I wasn't into software. It was just like I didn't understand any of the terms, any of the variable names, because they were after the terms. And I'm thinking, this is the worst thing ever. So I did a lot of journaling, and I keep my journals. I need to look it up. But I remember doing a sort of a matrix on, I like politics, but I don't want to run for office, and I had no skills or money or anything like that. I can be a programmer, and you make good money doing that. But at the last minute, I wanted to go to grad school. I thought, well, maybe I want to be a professor of economics, which I put on there too. Well, I applied, and little did I know that you need to be good at calculus, and calculus was one of the things responsible for me failing out of Purdue. Obviously, I didn't get into the PhD program at UT, but I also applied to the LBJ school, and I read about it. I remember getting excited about it, and it was a month after the deadline. And so I emailed the office, and I said, look, I just discovered your program. I know it's a deadline is a month later. I'm about to take my, I don't know, whatever is a GRE, yeah. And I won't get the results back. Can I apply it late? And they said, sure, which I don't usually ask for, exceptions. And so I applied late. Lo and behold, I got in, and they basically said, we'll give you 3 semesters through a fellowship. So I didn't have to pay for 3 out of the 4 semesters at the LBJ school. And it was made the best friends that I have now through that program. There was about 100 of us, and we were a really tight-knit group. And so the curriculum there was very generalist. So, we took a class. Like Bill Spellman is a city council member, and I took his class on city government and just became really interested in how government works. And I also had a year-long class where you actually go evaluate a piece of public policy. So there was a mental health program in Dallas called the North Star program.
Yeah. Back in the day.
Yeah, you've heard of North Star.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it was 2002. Yeah, 2002, 2003. And it was pretty interesting because the problem was if you lived in Dallas and you needed to see a counselor and you didn't have health insurance, your options were only to go to the local, what used to be called the MHMR Center, Mental Health, Mental Retardation, which they've since changed the name. But the waiting list is 6 months. So if you're having a crisis, you go there, and the waiting list is 6 months. The service was horrible. And so somebody had an idea, and I don't know the history of the idea, but it was a concept where anybody who was either on Medicaid, which is a program for people who can't afford health insurance, make under a certain amount of income, or indigent. And by indigent, it meant that you didn't qualify for a work health insurance program and some other things. So they basically recruited a bunch of doctors and said, would you be willing to take this card at this reimbursement rate? And a bunch of doctors said yes. And in fact, so what ended up happening with this program is they made the MHMR centers actually compete with regular doctors that took any sort of insurance. And a crazy thing happened in that word got around in the mental health community. And the clients were actually firing their doctors at the MHMR center and going to private sector doctors. So we evaluated this program. We looked at the analytics in the old state hospital up across the street from Chili's on, I think it's on Lamar, Vernon. And sat in there in that sort of dungeon, spent a lot of time at Chili's afterwards because we were there all day. And so that's really where I got interested in it. Like, this is really interesting stuff because we actually would go interview the clients. And we would interview the it was like an HMO or PPO or something that managed that program, Value Options, that was the name, if you remember that. And that at that point, I kind of found my calling. I was very interested in the implementation of public policy, but more so about that program, I was really interested in the bringing private sector dynamics to help public policy. And I took another class by, I read an amazing book. It's a very controversial figure, but it's a guy named Marvin Olasky, and he taught at the journalism school. He was an advisor to President Bush, and he's responsible for the term compassionate conservatism, so that may bring up sort of bad memories, but he wrote a really good book that I highly recommend. It's called The Tragedy of American Compassion, and evaluated what giving was like in the charitable sector before the Great Society and the New Deal, I guess. And it was pretty interesting that in the charity sector, more people, obviously there were a lot of problems in 1900, so this doesn't account for a lot of different public policy things, But what was interesting is that communities were a bigger part of the social net. So local churches, local organizations, and I would say Dr. Olasky probably had an opinion and a bit of a bias in that, that religious institutions should probably do more, just interpreting it. But it was fascinating on how, when there was a lack of a safety net, people were taking care of their neighbors a little bit better. And so that was a big class that left a huge mark.
I read a study came out recently along those lines that said that as people accrue wealth, their compassion and their charity decreases. So the most charitable people are those who are closer to the edge. And I just found that really interesting. I guess maybe living without the net makes you very conscious of, that could be me, so I should help this person because next time it's going to be me. So it was a really interesting study, but I believe it.
Yeah.
We've gotten away from that. So after you left LBJ, is that when you went to work for the city? And
yeah, I had 2 job offers when I left LBJ. One was at Dell, doing web methods. It was a sort of Java application for kind of doing the exchange of things, of documents between some of Dell's trading partners, and also the city of Austin. And the city of Austin was half the pay, and I think part of it was, it's kind of like I spent 2 years of my life foregoing a good salary, and do I want to end up exactly pretty much in the same building where I was before those 2 years? And I thought long and hard about it because the salary would have been nice after 2 years without working. And I think I was dating somebody new, and I think I kind of wanted to impress her, so I turned down the Dell job and worked at the city. And I was started out as a business analyst, and then kind of worked my way up to project manager with the city of Austin. And then just sort of, I worked on a project that allowed it was the software that the city council uses on the dais for managing the agenda. So when it was sort of my first enterprise software experience, project manager mainly, and we had a vendor that we recruited that won the contract, and then I remember that it's funny, the very first time we went live, I was a bit of a rogue in that office, and I probably shouldn't have been allowed to make some of those decisions that I did make. I remember Mayor Wynn saying, "Oh, if you guys, my system seems to be running a little slow, just give me a few seconds." And when you're the project manager and they're using your system, and he's saying, on TV that the system's running a little bit slow, that left a mark. Fortunately, we got some DBAs in there to make it better after that, but I was there for 2 years, and then I had another really cool program. I just happened to be the only runner in our office, and so Runtex wanted to build a new employee wellness program. So they approached the city manager, Toby Futrell at the time, who was my boss's boss. And because I was so into running marathons and things, she said, "Here's a project for you. Work with Runtex and figure out what they want to do, and then implement the wellness program." So I started the City of Austin PE department, physical education departments, which is basically gym class for city employees. And they loved it. I mean, it was like 50 people, and I would find all sorts of things on the internet to send them to inspire them. And it was fun. And so the big culminating event was you run a 5K. So we had some really big people that were just wanting to get in shape. And then it's weird. I got to go give a talk there like 2-3 years later after that was over with. And you couldn't recognize some of them. There's now 700 people that participate in this program. I only did it twice, but it was only 50 people when I left, but they've really made it awesome. So now the thing is, you get 1 hour of comp time if you show up to practice. So you're still working 40 hours a week, but the city manager has basically said, we're going to allow spin class, and now I think they even do golf lessons and all sorts of stuff. So you got sort of adult gym class. That was my favorite project there.
To talk to my employer.
Yeah.
Comp time. So what? Talk about Aunt Bertha. What inspired you to start it? What were you trying to solve? And what led you to take that leap? Of
going for actually jumping
yeah.
on. I don't know. I like to say if I knew then what I know now, I would do the exact same thing. But the nice thing about a startup is you have no earthly idea what you're getting into unless you've done it before. A bunch of crazy circumstances happened. I think being in New York on September 11th was an important part. The other important part was when I was 17, my mom caught a rare disease which caused permanent brain damage, which meant she lost her memory. So she had no idea who we were when we got back from the hospital. And then my dad had taken care of her for 9 years, and shortly after January 2002, he had gotten sick himself. He's doing okay now, and my mom's doing well now. But I became her legal guardian. So there I was trying to find a situation where she could live on her own, and she couldn't. And I didn't realize how bad the illness was. And although at the time I had some savings and a decent job, it was navigating. It was a needle in a haystack, trying to find what was available for somebody who's just able to live alone. If you're not wealthy, if you don't have any money or assets, which by that time the house was sold, she didn't have any money, just a few possessions. First of all, there's a lot of discrimination with anybody with any sort of disability that could be related to mental illness. So you could either live in jail, state hospital, or nursing home. That's it. There's no private pay facilities, and it's impossible. It's very, very difficult, especially if someone is subject to seizures and it requires 24-hour care. So having gone through that experience while I was a developer and while I was at the LBJ school, and she had been in lots of different living situations, and she was outright discriminated against. Nursing homes have the right to be selective in who they may consider to be an easier person to manage. So I remember getting advice from one of her social workers that basically said, as you're going to these nursing homes, write a cover letter and say, we'll be involved with as a family member, we'll be involved. And so I wrote a cover letter, and I just put a shirt on and jacket, and I probably looked like a high school teacher. And there I was walking into all the nursing homes in my neighborhood, which was Northwest Austin, and then so I was rejected over 20 times. And what I would hear is, we can't meet her needs. And so it didn't seem fair. And then she did end up. Turns out there was a director of nursing that was in a facility that knew her from one of the previous placements, and he took a chance on her. So she's been at that nursing home for the last 6 years. And it's not a lot to look at, but they're really good people that care a lot about her. So having lived through that, you can't help it. It's not any sort of benevolence at all. It's just like, look, we need to, there's a really broken system that just isn't fair. And then so going and visiting and things, I would hear stories of all these people's lives, and you kind of want to do something, and you just sort of pull towards that. So you take all of those experiences, and then at the time I was doing some consulting with a state agency, and it was during a crisis, during the economic crisis in 2008, and there was a huge backlog of people that couldn't get enrolled in food stamps. And so I was responsible for the analytics and the reporting for a call center operation. And every now and then I would go listen to calls. So I went to Midland, Texas, and put on a headset one day. And there was a woman from Houston that was calling because her food stamp benefits were being renewed. And so she had turned in her application for food stamps on like the day after she had gotten it. So she filled out all the paperwork, turned it in. And she'd gotten a letter saying that in Texas, if you renew your food stamps, you're required to do an interview with a state employee. So that interview was scheduled something like 4 or 5 weeks after her food stamps were going to expire. And the agent, what had happened was the state was so busy because of the economic downturn, they didn't have enough slots to do the interviews for the people who were set to renew, so it wasn't appropriately forecasted. And all the agent could tell her was, well, find the nearest food pantry. And that's what happened. And so that's where really the idea sparked on Aunt Bertha. You take those life experiences, and then I started searching and trying to figure out, well, how would you find out what's available? So I couldn't stop thinking about it, and then wrote a business plan and talked to different people. And then, yeah, I mean, I had some savings, and I was kind of counting the days, and I was waiting for some stock to vest. Went for it, and I would say that I was actually just talking to someone today. I would say that most of the assumptions from the original business plan has held true, except it's taken 3 times as long, easily 3 times, and that's probably conservative. And when you're a PMP, which I was, I had the Gantt charts. I basically figured out we're going to have the first product by December, the second product by June. The first product, which was 10% of the original scope, was done by June. Because back then, I could ask for a team, and just somebody would just sort of magically drop the team off, and we would have a kickoff meeting where you can have food. That's part of a corporate lifestyle. So I had no money, and it was my own personal savings, and so I couldn't hire people. So fortunately, I just started writing code again in probably November of 2011. It took me 7 months to build the MVP, and it went public. Released it to the public in probably the first week of June of 2011, and we got tens of users that first week. And
to start somewhere.
Well, yeah, and started doing it and doing it ever since. And it's weird because you would just get little things that would keep you going along the way. But then once that went live, it's been a blur because then you have users and you have people that you might get a newspaper article or you might get into an incubator program, and that kind of keeps you going. And then it's amazing how a pat on the back can keep you going for a couple of weeks. And then the team kind of grew. We had a couple of people that came out and basically said, I like what you're working on, can we join? And I was at a little office on Lamar, and I had a couple of part-time employees, and they weren't long-term, they were students or whatnot, maybe shortly after. One was with us shortly after graduation. And these two just came up, and they one was a designer, and I'm a developer, not a designer, very talented designer, and they both said, we'll come work with you. And I said, well, I don't have any money. And they basically said, oh, we'll figure it out. So, and so now there's 3 of us full time, and then we have a contractor as well. So there's 4 of us now.
So what's been your experience? You've had some angel investors. When you first start talking to them about this product that's designed to help people who, it's sort of the antithesis of what a Silicon Valley investor wants to hear. I have a product that people are going to spend tons of their disposable income in. It's going to steal money. You're kind of in a different boat. These people don't have resources, or they wouldn't necessarily need this product.
Yeah, they don't. Investing. It is, and it is the worst part about doing a startup is raising money. There's no shortcuts. I don't think there's luck unless you're well connected or unless maybe you've done it before. But from what I've seen, there's a tendency for us to think that people are better connected, and I think the older I've gotten, and after 3 years of doing this, I don't think that's the case. I think people have paid their dues in one way or the other. Either they went to a good school or whatever it may be. But I don't know how. I think I did some pitch event, and it just became very apparent that nobody was interested, even in the slightest. And so I had met somebody, and he hadn't raised any money, but he was been working full time on raising money for a year. And for whatever reason, I just decided I'm not going to try right away. And so I always had sort of a backup because I had savings and I was working on it full time. And then not a lot, but enough. And then when I realized that, look, I got to get more users and I got to get the paid product built, or at least close to being built, or at least get some early commitments before anybody would even consider investing. Fortunately, I wasn't very connected, so I didn't have hardly any conversations with angel investors. So I was able to start to get some user traction, and then it wasn't until I got into an incubator program called the Unreasonable Institute, which is out of Boulder, and where we started to get some traction on fundraising and also on just sort of the emotional maturity that it takes to do a startup. There were 22 entrepreneurs in 2012, and so I got in, and basically when you get in, you have to crowdfund $10,000, and they're all social entrepreneurs. So they at the time they set it up through a series of events where you can only collect $10 pledges the first week, and then like 25, and then like 50, all the way up to unlimited over a period of 6 weeks. So I'm actually really glad they did that because I never asked anybody for anything. And so I was then forced to pitch my friends to even just put in $10, just to get that. And basically, the top 20, I think like 20, there might have been like 35 entrepreneurs who were finalists, but the first sort of 20 crowdsourced at $10,000. So we made it in, and that just covered their costs. I mean, they weren't making any money. It's a nonprofit out of Boulder. But when I got there, it's run by this cohort of like 4, 25, 26, 27-year-olds. And you actually live, they're brilliant marketers. Daniel Epstein is the CEO, very good at marketing, brilliant videos, and they called it the Unreasonable Mansion. It turns out it was a fraternity house without air conditioning that they rent for the summer in Boulder. We learned that the first night, which is pretty funny. But then you're there living. My roommate was a cocoa farmer from Liberia, and Sheikh Abu Toure, and then so there's a woman that turned poop into power in Ghana. I mean, there's all sorts of different things. A couple of software companies, and just being there, and they taught a lot of principles. One of the biggest principles was just don't pitch people. And so they would have, they had one of the guys from, it's the venture capital firm that started, what is it called, Techstars? Yeah. So one of the partners there was one of the mentors, and they had other mentors, like a guy from Mozilla, a guy from Google X, all sorts of 50 different mentors that come in. And they decided that they wanted a pitch-free environment. And I didn't really understand at the time. I'm like, well, I'm not here to play. I'm here to raise money. And I didn't really understand what that really meant. And it finally started to hit me, is that when you're not pitching, you actually come across a lot better. And when you're not selling, you're more real, and people connect to that, being authentic. And I felt like I had to have every single answer. And I remember talking to one of the venture capital mentors, and I probably looked like a schmuck because you feel like you're trying to prove yourself. You're like, oh, I got an answer to that. But the fact is, they don't care. They don't want that answer. They're like, who are you? Tell me about yourself. What are you worried about? And then when I kind of realized that, it took that incubator program to do that. And then, so we actually got, the other thing I thought was that an angel investment decision is made after the first meeting. I got the pitch deck, it's easy, right? So the Unreasonable Institute did bring mentors, and they're all social impact mentors. They're very successful one way or the other. So it turns out from this one meeting, it was their demo day, we raised $100,000, but it wasn't until 4 or 5 months later. But they were all conversations from that first day. So we ended up getting 4 impact investors to raise $100,000 in November maybe of 2012, and that was like $1 billion to me. That meant that I could hire people. I could actually pay a couple of the team members a salary. First thing I did was hired a good friend from grad school from LBJ. Also worked at my old company, and then so we've been kind of living off that. And then we started selling our paid product, which was very minimally viable, and started to get a paid customer. And then we went from 1 customer to 8 customers within the last 2 months. So we're starting to get that point where we're getting more and more sales and starting to build on each other. We actually have a pipeline. Let me take that back. We actually know what a pipeline is, which is no exaggeration at all. We use Salesforce, and we have a weekly review. I actually follow up with people, which is important, I hear. And then we're close to closing some important customers. One would be our first city customer. One would be our first foundation customer. Relatively big. I mean, we're a low-cost product, but all of that kind of did that. So as we started to get some of that traction, we actually started raising money for our first equity round. So our convertible note round did not have a cap, so which was nice because we didn't have to give up equity for the $100,000. It converts to equity round. So. And got some angel investors that committed relatively early, and it's taken 6 whole months, but I think we're pretty close. Hopefully we can have closed within the next 3 weeks if everything works out well. But it had nothing about it at all has been easy, and serendipity plays a big role. And it's hard to say, but like the process can be very difficult, and you learn to not get your hopes up, which can be good, but can also sort of be bad. So, but once you get to that point, I think what my theory is of all the startups that make it, and I've never done one, we certainly could fail, is that you get to that point where you're like, there is a path to surviving this without investment. And if you can get to that point where you see that path, then you just get more confident. You're like, we're going to survive this. It'd be a lot easier if investors were on board. But if you can get to that point where you're starting to get paid products and you have people that are working for nothing, there's a lot of luck that is involved. But I think the process is pretty good in that the cost of starting a software company is so inexpensive. It's just a function of time. So if you can do it 100 hours a week to get there, even if you have to learn code, even if you have to basically teach yourself to be a software architect, teach yourself to do everything, I think it just sort of gets a little bit easier to raise money. But if you start out that way, I've had, it's pretty obvious when you're talking to an investor and they're not listening. So the advice is to just end the meeting. If they're not listening, it's okay. It's like, look, it doesn't seem like something you're into right now. Am I right? I know you have 100 things to do, and it's okay to say that. And yeah. But you'll get some that will do anything for you. They really are behind you and they believe in you, and you're part thinking, what's he seeing? Because I don't know, this guy's really taking a risk on me. You get those thoughts.
So what would you not do again? the biggest one you would not do again.
Not do again. That's a hard question. I think bringing in people earlier is really important. Not try to do it all yourself. So I didn't have a co-founder. Part of it was because I was afraid of asking people to be a co-founder. So when I just assumed, well, if I can't figure out, I need to get it to this point. So having a co-founder would have been a lot easier. To have somebody that is also going to put in that amount of sweat and tears in there. There were people that I really wanted, and in retrospect, I probably could have convinced them to code or whatever in their spare time on top of their day jobs. And in fact, we probably would have gone a lot further had I done that. And for whatever reason, I was just sort of either insecure about it or tried, kind of half-assed it, and would just sort of drop subtle hints to friends versus come right out and say, look, this is a lot of work. I think it's going to be a big thing. You can make a difference. And I just never asked. The other sort of main theme is I've had advisors that be like, you just have to freaking ask. You can't just hope. I mean, it's like dating, and I'm the wrong person to ask on what's effective in getting dates, but you can't just sort of hang around and say nice shoes.
That's not a bad way to start.
That's not a bad way, yeah, or whatever it is, because you'll either creep people out or you'll miss a lot of opportunities. And so that was a theme because I actually had an investor, and this is a funny story. I won't give out his name. He was the first guy that agreed to invest, and it was at Unreasonable Institute. And I sat down with her. This is my first angel investment conversation. I was with one of the Unreasonable Institute guys. We sit down with this guy, and he's asking me also. He's firing away at questions. Real smart guy, and he goes, well, what are you looking for? Well, we're raising. I think I said $500,000. We ended up raising $100,000. And I said, yeah, we're looking to raise $500,000. And he goes, well, what's your minimum? And this towards the end, he goes, he couldn't barely read which way he was going. And I said, well, our minimum is $25K. And then he goes, I'm in for 10. And I'm like, sold. So that was the first commitment. It was a $10,000 angel investment. And this guy's been a great mentor. And he's coming in again for this next round. And he basically said through these calls, he said, I think one of the reasons, because we built the paid product, and getting the second customer was ridiculously hard. The product was a little bit sloppy. What we're trying to do is kind of new. There's not a lot of things to point to. And he said, I think your problem is that I think the same problem you're having raising money is the exact same problem you're having closing deals. And for this person to tell me that, you have to start asking. And then through the enterprise sales stuff, what I thought was the step went from the first sale to actually getting a customer. You keep asking for little things in order to get to the contract. And so there's a lot of methodologies and things that you could do, like asking for a schedule and putting a schedule in front of a client and basically saying, look, this is the schedule that I put out there. And in one of those columns you put go, no go in the schedule. Get manager's approval, get board approval. And you just put that schedule in there. And then when you send the schedule, I just want to talk to you about this schedule. Look, I'm not expecting anything, I'm not being presumptuous, but is this the timeline you're thinking, for this? And then once you get them to actually, let's start changing these dates, then they're bought in. And so you can sort of get that. So I guess if you use a dating analogy, sort of getting somebody to go for a run with you before getting them to go to dinner with you, maybe it's the same thing, I don't know. But learning that was sort of like, it's the same problem. It was closing a co-founder, closing investment, closing sales. It's just getting out of the fear of rejection.
Well, and that's amazing because when you and I first met, I think you had the one customer, and that was just over the summer.
Yeah.
And so to go from there to 8,
Yeah.
That's amazing in a very short time.
Yeah, thanks. And it propels on itself, and so part of it I think is your own internal confidence, but also some of these conversations have been going on for 6 months, and then you start learning what a sales cycle is and how much time it takes for a sales cycle. And the other thing is just knowing, just talking. There's a guy I talked to that used to work for Convio who did software sales for Convio, which sold to foundations and sold to other areas and nonprofits. And it's kind of like, yeah, that's what it takes. Got to have a board meeting for a $600 expenditure. That happens sometimes.
I enjoy looking at your site, and it seems like an excellent way to connect people to the services. I'm not real clear who your customer is and what are they buying. Sure.
So you're looking at the search, and we don't do a great job of advertising what we sell yet. So the search that we do is a real simple way for people to find government and charitable programs. But a lot of, certainly nonprofits and government agencies, their process for getting people enrolled in their programs are typically paper, what we found. So literally they pay a lot of money to send out mail. So you can request an application to a government program or a charity. A letter is sent to your house. You fill that out, you send it back. They pay vendors a lot of time to scan that information. So it's a really simple SaaS product that allows charities to accept applications online. So it's a workflow software. I would use the term CRM, but it really isn't. It's more intake management in the social services space. So we sell those to our customers are governments, charities, or sometimes foundations.
Okay.
So our first customer is Foundation Communities in Austin, and it's a housing program. So they added this new channel to accept applications online. So rather than having to stuff envelopes sometimes they need to ask for follow-up information, like give me a copy of your driver's license. So with our software, you can just type a note, and an email is sent, and an alert is sent to the applicant. And the applicant can just take a picture of their driver's license and respond to an email with an attachment, and then it's then attached to our system. So it drives down the cost of getting people enrolled in the programs from the agency's end.
Okay. Yeah, that's really cool. I didn't gather that quite yet. So
Yeah, which is kind of another topic that we need to get into.
The website looks like an excellent way to kind of index or kind of a search engine for services available. And I like the way it's categorized and kind of broken down and dig through things. I was trying to decide if they could give me something good.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, and it's not just we all face trials and tribulations. I mean, cancer affects everybody, for example. So if one of us finds out we have cancer, to find that the closest support group is, it crosses the gamut of socioeconomics, or if somebody finds out their kid has autism or whichever,
Right.
finding those sorts of things is, it's not sort of a poverty thing. But,
So you primarily deal with government services, not private services?
all 8 of our first customers are charities. So we're close to getting our first city customer, which is a housing department of a prominent city.
That shall remain nameless.
Yes.
So the to be listed in the directory doesn't cost anything. It's just the service, the extra service you provide for the managing the interaction with this.
Exactly. Yeah. It's free, and we do approve what is suggested. And that may not be something that is scalable in the long run once we roll out to other states or to the whole. Our goal is to be the search essentially for the whole country. Big goal, but that's our goal. The requirements are that it be direct service, meaning the service is for clients themselves. We use the term seekers. So, and typically these are direct service foods programs, something like that. It's not a volunteer matching platform or anything like that. And then the other requirement is that it's based on something like a need-based eligibility, meaning either income or medical or things like that. Anybody can suggest a program. If they find that there's no programs, their program is not in the database, there's a form you can fill out, and it gets approved basically immediately. So the goal, I mean, if everybody in the country added their favorite nonprofit, then that's a big part of our success model, and we don't have that figured out for sure, is how do I get the rest of this data? There's no magic API out there to pull in. There's some lists, like GuideStar and some others, but they're incomplete big time. So a human has to massage that to get it into the right model. We just don't have that 100% figured out yet, but our goal over time is to work with different organizations, I'm going to DC next week for some meetings that we were able to get with the federal government. So hopefully by starting these partnerships and relationships, we can make it easier to extract that data and then make the search better. Because if you think of, like, from a startup's perspective, the sales funnel really is the search in our case. So we have the contact information of all of the agencies. So when we do have a marketing engine, which all we have at this point is a MailChimp account. So that is marketing, the free, I think we may pay $20 MailChimp account. But yeah, exactly. But we don't have the time to do the content to the monthly email. But is letting all of it, so anybody can list, as long as they fit those two criteria. And then we spend a lot of time seeding some of that data. So we'll actually do data entry. We'll hire temps to do data entry. So we're looking at a deal in a large city where a foundation would actually pay for the data entry for that large city. So that's just something that we didn't think people would do, but they wanted a quality job done that could be quality controlled. So that's a tough nut to crack. If we can be successful on the search, then it would be a lot easier to get in the doors to sell the application processing product. So if they have heard of us, our social workers use the search, then we can get in those doors. That's worked locally to some extent, but I think that's the key to success.
Yeah, especially if the social workers start using it instead of their own internal stuff, because it's easier to use.
Yeah, exactly. And we've heard that. And then there's also a relatively well-funded call center that does the same thing. So we're starting to see users give us qualitative stories about.
Do you get any pushback that this population that you're dealing with, kind of a lower, obviously a very low income population for the most part, except for where the kid gets cancer or whatever, that their usage of computers is still relatively low? And do you have any statistics on what that is now?
Yeah.
Say in the low income population, it's 50%, or it's higher than that or lower than that? You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this comes up a lot, especially.
I would think the social workers might push back and say, "Oh, they don't use computers."
Well, the social workers, the investors certainly bring that question up a lot. But the social workers have basically very simply have said, yeah, they have access.
Oh, good.
In fact, they're on their phones when they're in their meetings with me.
Right.
So there's been instances. So we did a really cool pilot project over 3 months at Goodwill, where they weren't a customer, but they just volunteered their time to help us with our taxonomy and with a whole bunch of usability issues, things like that. So ask them that over and over again. And what they, like anything, poor people are on Facebook. They use Gmail, Dropbox. I mean, they're doing this a lot of times now. And in fact, more so mobile. I mean, we're not that great optimized for mobile. When we get the luxury of being able to focus on that, that's a big part of the long-term strategy.
The kids have it at school.
Yeah.
But some of the parents might not have it.
Absolutely, and there's certain populations that we won't get, and so we want to do a better job. I mean, we'd love to have sort of a native Spanish version that doesn't use Google Translate, but we would have to build out our processes a little bit better so that when we write these descriptions, we can, have part of our workflow to actually write those descriptions. But more and more, so what I originally thought was, I think there was a study that came out in 2010. So 2010, it was a little old, but it was something like 40% of every household in the United States that makes less than $20,000 a year has broadband access at home, which was cable or DSL. And so that sort of goes to show you that, I'm sure it's grown since then. And I just moved, and so I just added Time Warner, and it's $36 a month at this point. And there was actually a $19 a month version of Time Warner, no contracts.
I saw online that you were a B Corp. Can you talk about your choice of becoming that, pros, cons, and so on?
And will you explain for me what that means?
I'll explain for her what that means.
B Corp, yeah.
Because I don't know either.
So a benefit corporation is, I don't know the history of it, but I thought about, do we want to be a nonprofit? And it was a good friend of mine was getting her MBA, and she was inspired by a meeting with Gary Hoover. So when I was writing the business plan for this as my birthday, she convinced him to go out to dinner with us. And we went to Fonda San Miguel and had dinner, and we were there for like 3.5 hours. So this was like the first time I guess, came out of the closet to somebody beside my friends about doing a startup. So talking to Gary was like, hey, I'm thinking about a startup, and of course he's very entrepreneur friendly. He listens, and we had a great dinner, and I said, I'm considering doing this as a nonprofit. That way I can take donations. And he listened, and of course he said, well, I had a lot of experience with nonprofits. I've sat on boards before, and I don't think you should do this as a nonprofit because you would then be competing with the people you're trying to sell software to for resources. And now you can be a sustainable business and still be a nonprofit. Some great examples are YMCA and Goodwill Industries. I mean, I don't even think Goodwill takes donations for the clothes, but they are an amazing organization. So I thought about it, and then I stumbled across B Corp, and I went and sort of filled out the initial paperwork. What B Corp is there's things that you agree to that means you have a bigger commitment than just shareholder value. And as a startup, like, you're not really thinking a ton about shareholder value because one is you don't have any shareholders, right? But there are some things that you can do that and allow. And what we did was the B Corp certification, meaning they asked us like hundreds of questions. You're required to have an independent board member that doesn't have any financial ties to the business, and you're also required to write into your corporate governance documents that you are committed to not only the shareholders but also the stakeholders. So let me give you an example. Let's just say we get a big funding from a venture capital firm, and it's not going well, and for whatever reason, and I'm not a lawyer by any means, but for whatever reason, somebody said, well, if we sell this data to payday loan places, our business is going to go up. What's going to keep that decision from being made? And the goal of a B Corp is to, one, have that independent board member, but also the point is, like, you can argue that payday loan advertising is not a very good thing for the stakeholders. So some states,
being your customers?
the seekers, the people in need that are doing the searching, so if we build a search engine for that, also the customers. So in the payday loan situation, a lot of them, maybe they've gotten better over the years, and I'm not making a judgment one way or the other, but basically, it gives you sort of legal ground to stand on to make an argument that you're also taking into account the stakeholder value as well, which are your users and your customers, instead of just shareholder value.
Did you do it at all for like almost like a PR perspective of how somebody views your company? Like in other words, you have the choice of it just being a C corp or S corp as well, which is like for profit. So is it like a
I mean, I think you probably do get some sort of PR gain, but I'd like to think that we did it because we believe in the longer term mission. You also subject yourself to financial audits. You have a 20% chance of being audited every year by B Labs. And then, in fact, we're a Delaware C Corp, but Delaware just recently announced legislation to be a B Corp by law. So it means that you just amend your charter and you basically do the requirements in order to be a B Corp, which gives it a little bit more teeth. It's all so new. Some people think it's just marketing.
So it's more, so if I understand, it's more like protection that your mission continues if your company grows and there's other people that are decision makers.
I think that's the intent. Now, how that plays out, because it's such a new thing, and whether those, I've never been in a boardroom, so I don't understand these boardroom battles that can play out, but that's the goal of it, is that you're building the governance structure in a way that you are taking into account stakeholders.
One last question. Anyone?
How do you get your traffic on the website?
Traffic. Word of mouth.
Yeah.
We haven't done any advertising. All of it's been word of mouth, or we got a newspaper article. We got into Mashable once, which actually got us some pretty good leads. Certainly the Memphis lead came from there, and some other cities. We haven't really done hardly any PR at all. Things have been sort of been getting around from that perspective. We don't have a strategy on building. Building and traffic is really important, especially now that we're in the whole state of Texas and a couple other cities. I just don't understand SEO very well, so I'd like to talk to some people that have SEO experience, because from what I understand about SEO, it's a relatively simple way to get that out there. We started a new concept called referrals, to where we added, just 2 weeks ago, we added, and we fixed the bug on it last week, but we added the ability to build custom referral lists for people. It was something social workers had requested. So if you're a social worker and people come through your office every day, if your clients, maybe you can't print out each listing or whatnot, you can create a referral list, and then an email is sent out to those guys. Eventually, a MailChimp campaign around monthly newsletter to everybody in our database, all the programs in our database. Hey, here's a service you may not be aware of. It's available to you, free to use. So we need to really put some emphasis around the market.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.